Hello, everyone. Welcome to this virtual meetup about Azure Stack HCI. My name is Daryl. For those who don't know me, I'm a Microsoft MVP from the Netherlands, focused on Azure and Azure Stack HCI. And joining today in this session is Cosmos. I'm trying to see if I can put you live. Let's see if that works. Yes, you can wave now.
Hello, thanks for having me, Daryl. Hello, everybody.
You want to introduce yourself, Cosmos?
Sure, yeah. So I imagine a lot of folks who are joining this already at least have heard of me in some or other capacity, but if you haven't, my name is Cosmos Darwin. I lead the product management team for Azure Stack HCI at Microsoft. That's part of the broader Azure Edge and Platform organization. And I've been working on essentially this under one name or another, whether it was Storage Spaces Direct or the Windows Server Software Defined Program or now Azure Stack HCI for, gosh, like 7 years or something. It feels like forever. So anyway, happy to talk about all of the exciting work that we're doing, the things we announced at Ignite a few weeks ago, maybe some hints at the roadmap for what's coming up. Yeah, happy to talk about Azure Stack HCI and really whatever it is that the community wants to hear about. So I think, Daryl, you've been gathering questions or something. So yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, exactly. So we're doing today a sort of Ask Me Anything style session. So you could send in your questions at forehand. I've gathered those questions and I will present them soon. And we're just ramping through them, and Cosmos will try to answer them if he can. The last time I got some comments about people not seeing us. So here we are. Hope this helps to get the personal touch in it. So yeah, just let's get started, Cosmos. So the first question is about SDN. If it works, go. Yep.
So let me see here. How important is SDN to? I can read the question actually. How important is SDN to Azure Stack HCI? It's currently an underutilized feature, and that shows as the UX is the least developed. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So there's a lot of potential in software-defined networking, and I don't think that we're fully realizing all of it right now. There's a few things that we can do and are doing. But I guess let me first sort of give the directional answer, which is today, a lot of people who use Azure Stack HCI use SDN. A lot of people also don't use SDN. And over time, it is absolutely our team's goal to shift that mix so that an ever larger number of, or ever larger percentage, I guess you could say, of our customer base is taking advantage of the capabilities that we think of as SDN, right? And that could be the sort of most advanced features like software load balancing, but even just the basics, right? Like being able to do access control for virtual networks and then microsegmentation. So our goal is to bring at least the set of capabilities that everyone wants to as many customers as we possibly can. And part of that, you see us, I think, taking the early steps where, for example, it used to be prior to 2019 that you had to kind of go all in. Either you had SDN for every VM in your environment or you didn't. And then now, of course, it can coexist with traditional pre-SDN networking, which makes it easier to sort of dabble. In the fullness of time, I think we're going to get to a place where, similar to when, like, you know, when you do enable S2D, like a whole bunch of different things turn on and it's all kind of it's all there by default. I think we'll be able to get to a place like that with SDN as well. Certainly isn't where we are today, though. You're right. And one of the big gaps, I agree with the person who asked this question, is the UX, right? There's a lot more that we can do and that we need to do in Admin Center. And frankly, some of it may actually be in sort of at-scale tools as well for SDN. So yeah, I mean, how important is SDN to Azure Stack HCI? It's very important, and I agree that we have a lot of room to sort of improve and do more here.
Is there more development coming from Azure management side? So managing SDN on Azure Stack HCI from Azure?
Certainly, at least a little bit, right? So if you look at the big announcement that we made at Microsoft Ignite a couple weeks ago around VM management through Azure's control plane for the virtual machines that are running on your HCI cluster, you can like provision a VM now, and you can see the VM images, the disks attached to the VM. You can see those things in the Azure portal, and they're all projected as first-class resources into the portal, and you can manage them. That is the most natural way for a customer who's used to Azure to manage virtual networks as well, right? For them to be able to say, hey, I've created a virtual network and I'm going to attach, a VNIC for each of these 3 machines to that virtual network. So I think that is where, at least for those kinds of experiences, that's where customers expect it to show up based on the precedent that exists with Azure IaaS. And so certainly we'll be doing that. At the same time, I mean, I think there's an important psychological reassurance for customers that if you don't have internet for whatever reason, you can still fully manage your system. And so I think the bulk of the infrastructure-centric management is going to remain in Admin Center. We're doing various things to make Admin Center easier to access. I think a lot of it will remain there, but certainly for like the user scenarios, like creating a VNet and attaching a VM to it, that needs to live in the portal because that's where people expect it.
Right. Yeah, I saw some cool developments about what's it called? Azure Extended Networking, where you can stretch a VNet into your premises. So you have the same subnet living in Azure and on your Azure Stack HCI virtual network. Right. So I think it will become really a big thing. So SDN for Azure Stack HCI in that sense. Yeah, looking forward to it. It's cool. Anything to add or next question? No,
let me just say I agree with what you most recently pointed out there. So especially as we get into extending a virtual network, like this is where it starts to be the number of hoops you have to jump through to bridge non-SDN networking on-prem with Azure's network constructs becomes sort of, there's more and more like translating that you're doing. So I agree with you.
Nice.
Only going to become more important in time. And by the way, let me say thank you for this question also, because I love to hear from our SDN enthusiasts.
Next one. Where's the official documentation to start or stop a whole cluster?
So I'm assuming the scenario here is like I'm moving the cluster across the street or something, and I need to stop the whole thing, or I guess I'm doing a power cutover, for example. It's a good question. I actually don't know if we have docs for that. It certainly is possible, right? I think the person, based on the wording of the question, it sounds like the person who asked this knows that it's possible. But if it's not documented, I think we can, let me actually like make a note of that, because we can publish the steps for it. I mean, it's not that complicated, but right. I don't know if we have docs. If we don't, we should. So we'll do that. Oh, that answers the question. Why support network ATC only fixed VLANs and not custom VLANs? Okay, well, 2-part answer. One, I think you can override the VLANs for both compute and storage and management traffic if you want, but also we have Jacob Petticord on the call too. So Jacob, do you know the answer to this one? The ATC question?
First need to change this role, sorry. Yes, Jacob, you can now unmute.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
We can actually. You want to briefly introduce yourself, folks? We got a whole little cavalcade of friends from Microsoft here. So Jacob, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'm Jacob Petticord. I'm a PM on the core networking team, but I do a lot of work to support features like network ATC that help make Azure Stack HCI networking a better experience for you all. So I believe that the question is, can you set a VLAN other than 711? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. It's just not well documented. And that's something that I'm actually looking to fix today, is to update that documentation. So when you create an add net intent, or when you're running add net intent, there's a parameter called storage VLAN. So if you just do -storage VLAN, you can change it from 711 to whatever you desire. So hopefully that solves that use case. But if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to support customers who are trying out ATC and running into issues. And then for more common use cases like this, there's a blog post by Dan Cuomo called Network ATC Common Preview Questions that's out there online that has the answer to this question and a bunch of other ones like it.
Awesome. Nice. And at first, thank you, Jacob. At first, I was thinking these were unrelated to each other, but now I realized that the relationship is, the answer to both of them is better documentation. Hopefully that answers both questions there. I think one action for me, one action for Jason, or so sorry for Jacob, both of which boil down to docs.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Jacob, for tuning in. All right, next question. New features for Azure Stack HCI OS 22H2 and beyond.
Yeah, okay. I'm happy to, I guess, say a little bit here. So as I think folks are probably aware, one of the things that I'm really excited about with Azure Stack HCI is our ability to deliver regular OS feature updates at a much faster cadence than we had been doing previously. Some of the feedback that we got, especially over the last like 3 or 4 years with the Windows Server Software Defined program, was like, hey, it's really frustrating that I have to wait 2 or 3 years for new features that are in the host, right, or that are hypervisor level innovations or changes. For folks who have been around for a long time, you may remember like deduplication supporting REFS was sort of ready maybe 2 years before it was actually available because the release cycle was so infrequent for Windows Server LTSC releases. So anyway, one of the big things, we got a lot of feedback like that. One of the big things that I'm excited about is with Azure Stack HCI, we have the ability to deliver updates much more quickly. So far you've seen us publish the initial release, which it was the least, it was the release that had the least, right? Every release after that's going to have more. That release was in the second half of 2020, in sort of late fall of 2020. We just released our 21H2 feature update in second half of 2021, fall 2021. And we've already started hinting that that pattern can be expected to continue. I think we have one build of 22H2 already published in our preview channel. And I fully expect us to continue that release cadence over time. So first thing to comment is just like, yes, we are working on Azure Stack HCI version 22H2. I fully expect that it will look, in terms of the actual packaging and delivery, a lot like 21H2, meaning it's a over-the-air feature update that's included for all subscribers that just becomes available one day. You'll see a banner in the Azure portal and you'll be able to apply it using clusterware updating, just like 21H2. So then the question, I think, is what's going to be the payload of new capabilities inside of that release? There's only so much I can say here. I can think of maybe a dozen in my head, but almost all of them we want to announce at some point. And usually we try to do that when we have a preview of that capability. So we'll have several preview channel builds of 22H2 over the coming year, and each one will introduce a set of features which we'll talk about. So I don't want to sort of spoil all of the surprises, but it's a lot of, like, if you've been following closely, it's a lot of the things that you would expect, right? And so, can you share GPUs with the current version across multiple VMs? No. Does everyone want to do that? Yes. Does that mean Microsoft's working on it? Duh, yes, right? Are there ways in which we could make the performance of a stretched cluster for the replication traffic specifically faster? Yes. Has everyone told us that they want that? Yes. Are we working on it? Duh, yes, right? So a number of these things are kind of what you can expect to see in 22H2, but we haven't really shared a specific enumeration of features yet. Now, there are 2 things on the slide which I guess I can talk about a little bit. So there's SAP on Azure Stack HCI and shielded VMs and its replacement, smiley face. So let me return the smiley face to you. I'll do shielded VMs first. So a big priority for the entire Azure team, of which my team is a small part, right? We work on Azure Stack HCI. A big priority for us is to enable you to secure your virtualized workloads. That may sound generic, but it's a huge priority and focus for us within the team. There are a set of technologies that we're launching, or that we've in some cases announced, in some cases launched in preview, in some cases they're actually fully available in Azure, that over time we expect to bring basically the parity of those capabilities onto Azure Stack HCI. So for example, in Azure, we've talked a lot recently about Azure Trusted Launch for virtual machines. This is not the same as a shielded VM. There's a lot of nuance there, but it has some of the same characteristics. For example, you can have a VTPM with encryption, and then that VM can move around. One of the nice differences is with a trusted launch VM, there's not a host guardian service behind the scenes, which means you don't have to set one up yourself. So there are things like that we've introduced in Azure And we're working very, very closely, like right now, with those teams to bring those same capabilities to our edge infrastructure too, to Azure Stack HCI. So we're definitely working on that, but we haven't. First of all, it won't be exactly the same as shielded VMs, right? There will be differences. There will be things that are like different trade-offs that we've made, where it's maybe lighter weight or easier in exchange for a slightly different set of promises and guarantees. So we'll talk more about those features when they're available in preview channel. Again, generally our rule is going to be when something is ready for you to try, that's when we'll come out and talk about it. And you can expect that over the coming year. For SAP, I'm guessing that this is really a question about certification or like official sort of validation and endorsement. I'm sure you're aware you can run SAP in a VM on Azure Stack HCI today. There's like nothing technically that prevents that from occurring. The thing, of course, is like any customer running SAP for real wants it to be a platform that is officially sort of validated and supported by SAP. So I can say we are actively engaged with SAP, again, like right now. Our goal is for Azure Stack HCI to support not just technically, but like in the sort of practical certification sense as well, all of the workloads that customers want. And SAP, needless to say, is on that list. It's very high on that list. What you may have noticed us do earlier this year is like, so there's a set of first-party workloads, as in workloads that are made by Microsoft, and then there's a set of workloads that are from other software companies, right, like SAP. And we were able to execute more quickly on the ones that are Microsoft made, right? And so things like Azure Virtual Desktop or the Azure Kubernetes service, like those are already there because that was completely within our control. For things that are from third parties like SAP, we're working with those vendors, and I do fully expect us to have all the official certifications in the fullness of time. So it's something we're working on, but I don't have an ETA for it.
So let me rephrase that. So are you saying that you're going to enable like a partner ecosystem on top of Azure Stack HCI, and when applications are certified running on AKS or in VMs, it can also be supported on HCI?
Yeah, I mean, there already is a thriving ecosystem of applications, right? Like from a strictly technical perspective, you can run, there's about 20 different guest OS versions that you can run inside of a virtual machine. And then of course you can run Windows or Linux containers with, and we provide sort of the built-in worker hosts for that. A whole host of different applications, no pun intended, can run in VMs or on containers on Azure Stack HCI. And most of those applications are not made by us, right? Like the crushing majority are things that are from the ecosystem or from customers themselves, like line of business applications that they have. So that's already true. I think what is maybe missing right now is for some of them that have a sort of a very rigorous certification process, and SAP is one of those. Obviously, like generically HyperV is already certified, but the specific Azure Stack HCI branded product does not have like a separate listing on that ISV's website. And so that's something that our team is working on. But from a technical perspective, like, I mean, you can already do this.
Right, but what I'm targeting is like, if we have a vendor with a specific application, that it can be certified for running on Azure Stack HCI, right? So let's say I have a database workload, and some vendors want specifically to run it only on validated infrastructure. Is the Azure Stack HCI team going to provide like a become a certified platform for this X or Y application?
So we have not gotten that request up until this point. There are a ton of applications that can be run in Azure Cloud. Many of those vendors have expressed a desire to be able to run them on Azure Stack HCI. There are certain product capabilities that we can deliver that will make that easier, right? So, for example, being able to access images that come from the marketplace is a step that we can do that makes it easier to get at some of these applications. But I've not yet heard one of these vendors like ask us to make them jump through hoops to appear on a list. So if they want that, I mean, yeah, sure, we can make up some hoops and put them on a list. But I mean, we kind of think of Azure Stack HCI largely as an open platform, right? We support as many guest OSs as we can. We support as much variety of applications, both containerized and virtualized as we can. And you don't need our permission to run an app on Azure Stack HCI. It's your infrastructure and it's open infrastructure. So bring an app and run it.
Yep, clear. Next slide or question. Will we ever get scale-out file server role officially supported? So that's on the cluster, not in a virtual machine.
Yeah, so this one I don't have a whole lot to say. I mean, never say never, right? But this is not high on our priority list right now. Very open to feedback as to what scenario this would be useful for. I'm guessing that it's for a disaggregated architecture, but that's just my guess. We have a set of workloads that we are very committed to bringing natively onto Azure Stack HCI. I've mentioned a few of them already, like today, one of the fastest growing workloads, in fact, the fastest growing workload in all of Azure Compute is the Azure Kubernetes service. Like being able to run containerized workloads is driving an incredible amount of growth actually for Azure. And that's not just coming from, it's a really, really healthy mix of Windows and Linux containers. And it's a healthy mix of customers who are longtime Microsoft shops and who are actually new to Microsoft or new to Azure, but they're saying, look, I've heard about the Azure Kubernetes service and that's where I want to run my application. And so they're like, there's tremendous momentum that's forming around AKS. For that reason, AKS is like right at the top of our list of roles or workloads, if you will, that need to run really well in Azure Stack HCI. Another incredibly popular and fast growing workload in Azure is Azure Virtual Desktop, hence our official support now in preview for running Azure Virtual Desktop, including Windows 10 and Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session on HCI. So we're taking kind of a data-driven approach, I guess is what I'm saying, where based on the workloads that we see driving a huge amount of interest and activity, especially in Azure, because that gives us a very interesting lens into what people are doing, we can then prioritize them and bring them natively onto Azure Stack HCI. Never say never. I mean, I'm not opposed to doing this. It's just not at the top of the list right now.
I think it's a nice bridge for the following questions, which are my favorite.
Okay, this is you guys are making me read out there. Thank you very much. The announcements at Ignite were exciting and go some way to answering a question I have had for a while, why Azure Stack HCI over Azure Arc plus other infrastructure? What unique features will be offered only on Azure Stack HCI? Arc-enabled features come to many non-Microsoft infrastructures. Will AVD be one of them? Will AVD, sorry, Azure Virtual Desktop be one of them?
Yeah, so I think if I translate it in my Dutch blunt, I think that someone is asking, why would you not run VMware using Azure Arc and still have the same benefits? Or any other vendor like Nutanix or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, this is a good question. I'm going to have to give it's a very good question, by the way, and it has a nuanced answer. So I'm going to have to give like a at least 3-part answer to this question. I hope that's okay. But I don't feel so bad because there's at least 3 different question marks in this question. So let me take a step back. When we talk about Azure Stack HCI, and this is how we talked about it a lot at Ignite this year, and it's how we do all of our planning internally, there's a couple of different things that we're trying to do, right? One is enable you to take advantage of Azure's management tools and management services so that you can sort of transform toward a modern way of operating and a modern set of tools. That's one piece of what we're doing. Another piece of what we're doing is offering a set of workloads and a set of benefits associated with those workloads that are things that originate in Azure, but that we can extend to edge infrastructure. And that includes things like AVD and AKS, right? And the auto manage for Windows Server and the Windows Server Azure edition, and there's a whole bunch extended security updates. And then the third thing is we have an enormous team of engineers innovating on the hypervisor and on the software-defined infrastructure stack, right? Like if you think about how many machines, not only we run internally, but like run out in the world that run our hypervisor and our infrastructure stack, we have a huge set of engineers sort of constantly innovating and improving and optimizing that. And some of those innovations are quite incremental, and some of them are actually quite transformative, like kernel soft reboot, right, which allows you to reboot like an order of magnitude faster than you could otherwise. So there's these like three distinct things that we're trying to bring to the edge with Azure Stack HCI. There's the Azure management, there's the Azure workloads and benefits, and then there's the Azure kind of infrastructure innovation that our engineers are making. There's some slightly different dynamics with each of these, right? So I'll start with the management. The way that we can make the management tools most helpful for a customer is actually by making them available as broadly as possible, right? Because if you think about something like Defender for Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is the security solution that we have, or Monitor, Azure Monitor, right, with logs and metrics and alerts and insights, and some of the newer things like workbooks and runbooks. Those tools are most useful if you can use them across everything that you've got, right? And so if you have a set of, say, workloads or applications that you're running in Azure Cloud, and then you order some Azure Stack HCI, but you actually still have some VMware, like it's most useful if you can standardize on a set of tools across all of that, right? That's how you make management tools like that useful. And this is not a new idea. This is something that goes back, like if you look historically, there have been ways that you can use some or all of System Center with other infrastructures too, right? Because it's inherent to management tooling that you want them to kind of be horizontal and be available everywhere. And so that's what we're doing with Azure Arc. And if you look at Arc-enabled management services like Monitor or Backup or Defender, like we are making them available not only for our own infrastructure, but actually on other infrastructures too. And that's very deliberate, and it's not like tricky or anything. It's just that's how you make them the most helpful, right? If you're in the business of offering management tooling, you try to make it work with everything. And so we're doing that, right? And so in that sense, if you wanted to use Azure Monitor to monitor virtual machines, or I'll give another example, use Azure Policy to actually sort of govern how the machines are configured. Like it's true, you can do that on Azure Stack HCI, and you can also do it on a competing platform, right? Like I think you mentioned VMware, right? And I think that's a strength. I think that's a good thing, right? It's a reason that as a customer, if you're making an investment in one of those management tools, to sort of learn it and skill up your team and like develop a set of sort of either best practices or configurations or like custom workbooks or whatever, you can make that investment confidently, knowing that like you'll be able to use it across your whole environment. So that's
yeah.
true.
So that basically says that the most important part is Azure Arc, right? So Azure Arc is enabling that unified governance or management from Azure. And the infrastructure underneath is irrelevant, but Microsoft also has some very nice infrastructure component, which is called Azure Stack HCI.
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that it's irrelevant at all, actually. So there's management, which is important, right? But then very important is the infrastructure too, right? And the dynamic there is different. And so some customers have existing investments in infrastructure from Microsoft or from some other vendor. But for a customer who needs to either refresh their infrastructure or procure new infrastructure because either they're digitally transforming something that wasn't already digital or they're expanding or whatever, right? We obviously have our infrastructure offering, which is Azure Stack HCI and the whole Azure Stack family for that matter. And we can deliver innovation there that is completely separate, complementary, but separate from the management level innovation, right? And I mentioned KSR earlier. And there are other things that the team is working on that we'll talk about over the, like we talked a little bit about trusted launch and security technologies. Like there's a whole bunch of things that fall into this category of infrastructure innovation. We can't bring, like, this may sound silly, but let me say it because it's important. We can't bring KSR to VMware. Right? Like that doesn't make sense, right? And so there's a set of management tools that we can make available everywhere. So we're doing it so that it's as helpful as possible. There's also a set of infrastructure innovation that is obviously only going to be available on our platform. And our goal is to make our infrastructure the best infrastructure. That's what my team spends all day working on, right? And we're going to continue to do that. We'll do that through these yearly releases through 22H2 and 23H2 and beyond. But I think that's a little bit like it's complementary. It kind of fits hand in glove with the management narrative, right? So if you like our infrastructure, you choose our infrastructure. I think it's fantastic. Like as everyone knows, I'm a huge enthusiast when it comes to technologies like HyperV and Storage Spaces Direct and things like KSR now. that's great, and it will. Those, our commitment is that it will integrate extremely well with Azure's management tools. But it doesn't make sense for us to sort of say, oh, the management only on our platform. You're not allowed to do Azure backup of a VM on VMware. Why would we do that, right? It's actually more useful to customers if it's available everywhere. Now, if you don't mind, the third thing I should say is there's also the workloads that I talked about, right? And so there are a set of sort of canonical workloads that everyone wants. Virtual desktops is one, Kubernetes is another. And obviously you can run Kubernetes on VMware, but you can't run the Azure Kubernetes service on VMware. And you can run virtual desktops on another platform. You can't run the Azure Virtual Desktop Service on another platform. And so there are a set of these workloads and benefits associated with those workloads that are today only available on the Azure Stack family, including Azure Stack HCI. I fully expect that will continue. I think for the management tools that we can make available in more places, because it's kind of generic, like we'll do that, right? We've gotten feedback that that's useful, that's helpful for customers, so we're going to do it. But everything that we're doing in the infrastructure and everything that is sort of like an Azure specific workload or workload benefit, all of that is, I think, going to remain very much sort of tied to our edge infrastructure offerings. Not for any reason other than it's what we can deliver, right? And for the most part, those things have an equivalent, better or worse. I'm not trying to take a stance on that, but they have an equivalent from a competitor, right? And so if you are using our infrastructure stack, you'll probably use our virtual desktop service and our Kubernetes service. That's awesome, right? You can manage it through Arc-enabled Kubernetes. If for whatever reason you've chosen not to, or your predecessor chose not to, or you acquired a company and they chose to use some other infrastructure, that's fine, right? You can run their hypervisor, their Kubernetes stack. They probably have a virtual desktop solution. And then you can, to use the Kubernetes example, you can still enroll it in Arc-enabled Kubernetes so that some of the management tools that you want to have standard can be standard. So it's a bit of a nuanced strategy, but I think it's important to separate out the management, which is everywhere, the infrastructure, which is specific to our platform, and the workloads and benefits, which for the most part are also specific to our platform.
Yeah, that's a good recap indeed. So we got three parts, right? So you got the management from Azure, which extends seamlessly to the infrastructure part, which is HCI. And then you got the service on top, which hopefully, or not hopefully, but that will be only enabled on Azure Stack HCI to get that advantage on competitors, which I hope for, but I'm not sure if that is the direction for Microsoft. So that we only get AVD and AKS support workloads on the Azure Stack family.
Yeah, I think an important way to look at it is our goal is not to artificially constrain things to our platform, right? And so there are a set of things that we can do on our platform because they're enabled by the technologies inherent to the platform. That's always going to be true of any platform. But for things that are generic, like Azure Monitor, obviously we are building on top of Azure Monitor to deliver special scenarios and integrations and views and so on for Azure Stack HCI, but the core part of Monitor can run anywhere. And so we don't want to artificially prevent it. We want to say, okay, great, that's awesome, right? If you have a VM sitting on some other infrastructure, by all means, enroll it in Monitor, right? So that's kind of the lens we're taking, is there's a set of things we can do on our platform that are unique, but if there's something we can offer in more places, it makes sense for us to do it, at least most of the time. I mean, right. The heuristic is this helpful for customers if we do this? If the answer is yes, then we will do it.
Okay. Next question coming up. This is an interesting one, which I have answered a lot last year. Why would you still use Azure Stack Hub? So maybe a little recap for people that don't know Azure Stack Hub. So Azure Stack Hub is like the on-premises cloud platform, which is actually a copy of Azure in your data center. So you also get the Azure ARM layer. You have closed systems delivered by the vendors. And one big advantage I think that you had is that you had your own Azure ARM resource running on-prem. So it can be completed, air-gapped, or disconnected, or whatever you want to call it. And now, of course, Azure Stack HCI is positioned as the on-premises infrastructure part that is connected to Azure ARM. So you cannot consume Azure ARM from on premises, but you can consume it from the Microsoft Azure side. So if I answer this question to customers, I mainly say Azure Stack Hub has specific use cases, so for disconnected or air-gapped scenarios, or host scenarios with multi-tenancy. I think I've touched. Yeah. Do you have any other points that I missed? Why you still need Azure Stack Hub?
I think your answer is broadly correct. This is sort of a funny question. If you don't mind, I'm going to answer it at a high level for a second. So, you know, the Azure Edge and Platform team at Microsoft, which is what the Azure Stack HCI team is part of. As I mentioned, our goal is to sort of bring as much of the innovation and technology that's being developed in Azure around the tools and the services and the infrastructure and make that available outside. There are lots of different forms that can take. And this is the primary reason that we have a portfolio strategy with Azure Stack, right? So we have several distinct products in the portfolio, and they're each pretty different, actually. Obviously, they all use the same underlying technology. They all run the same hypervisor. They all have S2D running in there, right? But they're packaged up in some pretty different ways. If you look at Azure Stack Edge, for example, right, it's a first-party hardware appliance that actually ships, like Microsoft built a distribution center where we ship the servers from, a whole bunch of capability that we didn't have before, because some customers were giving us the feedback that it's actually really useful, helpful for them if they can get the software and the hardware all in one shot from Microsoft. So Azure Stack Edge delivers that to them, right? And it's targeted at a set of use cases right now that are really around IoT and machine learning at the edge and a few other scenarios like that. Similarly, Azure Stack Hub is super different from that, and it's also super different from Azure Stack HCI. Same infrastructure, same hypervisor, same software-defined storage at the bottom, but the capabilities that it delivers, right? It's not an integrated hardware software appliance that ships from our factory, right? It is instead really geared toward giving you, as Daryl, as you said, like a mini Azure region, if you will, in your data center, right? And so you have your own local instance of the Azure Resource Manager. You have your own local instance of the Azure portal. And for certain scenarios, and you alluded to them, if you cannot be connected to the internet, like if air-gapped is a requirement, or if you want to do multi-tenanted chargeback where there's multiple subscriptions simultaneously existing on the same stamp, and you're charging back each VM individually to a different subscription, those are things that only Azure Stack Hub can do today, right? Azure Stack Edge is not able to. Azure Stack HCI isn't able to do that either. And so for those kinds of scenarios, Azure Stack Hub is absolutely the right product to choose. And this like sort of huge spectrum of different needs is exactly why we have a portfolio strategy, because we still see a huge amount of like very healthy interest in all three of the products, depending on what requirements customers actually have.
Cool. We need to speak faster or smaller answers.
Okay.
Okay. So the best strategy to migrate from HyperV and VMware to Azure Stack HCI.
Okay, good question. So I was told to keep my answers short, but this one's a multi-part as well. So today, there are essentially three things that you can do. You can manually move VMs by like exporting them, stopping them, exporting them, copying the files, and re-importing them. That's obviously quite cumbersome, and there's a lot of potential for error, but that's one thing you can do today. Second thing is if you have System Center in your environment, which I know almost everyone actually does, then you can use System Center VMM to automate that migration from your existing infrastructure onto Azure Stack HCI. It is not without downtime, but it is much more convenient than doing it manually. And again, that's applicable if you sort of already have System Center in your environment. If you don't, it's probably not worth setting up just for this, but that's your second option. Your third option is you can use tools from a third-party ISV. So you can use tools from like Veeam, for example, to back up a workload and then restore it onto an Azure Stack HCI cluster. Those are really the three today. They each have a set of strengths and a set of drawbacks. So for this reason, you're going to see us talk a lot next year about investments we're making here. It's actually the single largest engineering effort right now within our team is around improvements for how you can migrate to Azure Stack HCI. So we'll have a lot to share, a lot to talk about next year on this. But until we really get into it, I don't want to. I'm not sure that there's much more that I can say other than you have those 3 options today, and we know that none of them are perfect, and so we'll have a lot to talk about next year on this front.
Next year, like January?
Next year, like sometime during 2022, certainly we'll have previews in the first half.
Right. I got 2 questions also in the Q&A about Airgapping Azure Stack HCI, and this is about an Azure using a proxy to go to the internet to register.
Okay, yeah. So this is I think 2 distinct questions. So let me first talk about Airgap. So I mentioned before, right? One of the unique things that Azure Stack Hub can do is you can get a local instance of the Azure Resource Manager, a local instance of ARM, and of the Azure portal, and that's what enables it to run in this fully air-gapped form. If you wanted to use Azure Stack HCI without any tether back to the Azure cloud, a huge amount of the value and what actually makes Azure Stack HCI compelling is not available to you, right? I think sometimes maybe folks are guilty of thinking, oh, Azure Stack HCI, that's really just S2D, right? I want to use that. But really, like if you look at the feedback that we see from both the customers that we work with directly and indirectly through our partners in our field sellers, I mean, like Azure Virtual Desktop, Arc-enabled Kubernetes, the integration with Azure Monitor, those are the things that are really driving interest right now. Those require a connection to the cloud. And so like you have to be able, like the whole point of AVD is there's a cloud hosted control plane that is managed for you, the load balancers, the brokering, that's all set up for you. Therefore, it is much, much easier than the historically very challenging task of setting up your own VDI infrastructure, right? That's like the whole point. For that to work, you obviously need line of sight to the cloud, right? So for that reason, I don't expect that, like, at least in the near term, we're going to be doing anything around a fully air-gapped Azure Stack HCI, just because I don't think that the scenarios are really there for us to deliver the sort of value that we're trying to deliver with this product. Now, with that said, we absolutely do want to enable as many different proxy configurations as we can, and that includes like a non-transparent proxy, a transparent proxy, so one that's authenticated or not authenticated. And we have a lot of work to do here. So you can today configure your Azure Stack HCI nodes to route through a proxy, a transparent proxy, to reach the Azure cloud. But there's like a ton of reasons that is slightly tricky. There's not, for example, a great PowerShell to set it. We have built better PowerShell, which we will ship soon. There certainly isn't black UI to actually configure the proxy or see the proxy setting. Same thing, like we're working on this. So we do want to support as much flexibility as we can on various like indirect routes to getting connected to the cloud. And we'll have a lot to share on that over the course of the coming months in 2022. But fully air-gapped, I'm not sure that it really makes that much sense. So that's not something that we'll be talking about at least soon.
Okay. We have allow usage of Azure HCI without storage space direct. We're gonna skip over this one. Sorry.
Interesting.
I
will say, whoever it was that submitted that, please tweet at me with what you mean. Like, are you thinking a single node that doesn't have like a distributed SDS, or are you thinking that you want to use some other external storage like an iSCSI target or a SAN or something? Yeah, if you have Twitter, tweet at me with what you meant about that, because that's haven't heard that question in a long time actually.
What's your Twitter handle?
At Cosmos Darwin.
GPU roadmap.
What's the GPU virtualization roadmap? As in, when can GPUs be virtualized so that a single GPU can be shared by multiple virtual machines in a host? Yeah, so this is a good question. We have a multi-release roadmap that the team is executing on to gradually add more and more capability around GPUs. If we look at the applications and the workloads that we see, and also at the solutions that we see coming from sort of the hardware ecosystem, it's very clear that GPUs are just of rising importance with each passing year, and they're like definitely here to stay. This is not some kind of a fad. This is like a durable part of software-defined infrastructure going forward. So we actually made huge strides in 2021 with our 21H2 release. I don't know if folks are aware, but like you can now actually have a workload that has a GPU assigned to it and then can fail over and then receive a GPU on the new node when it starts again. So you essentially get high availability with a GPU enabled workload. That's new. That's not something that was there before. And a lot of changes had to go into clustering and into the hypervisor to make that possible. The same teams that delivered that are continuing every semester to build more and more capability around GPUs. One of the absolute next things is partitioning GPUs so that they can be shared across multiple virtual machines. My expectation is that this is not far away on the roadmap, but it's also not completely binary. So even when we do ship that capability, which again, I don't think will be very long, there's more that we can do, right? And so there's enabling, for example, para-virtualization so that the partitions don't have to be fixed, but they can actually be dynamic. There's enabling live migration so that a VM not only can fail over when it has a GPU assigned, but actually can migrate with no downtime at all, with including the GPU state, right, being sent between the nodes over to the GPU on the receiving end. There's a whole roadmap here that the team is working toward. We had some pretty big advances in 21H2, and you can absolutely expect some more big advances in 22H2 and almost certainly in several releases after that, because there's a lot here that we can do. And again, like the number of workloads that use GPUs, we're actually going to be releasing more workloads ourselves that use GPUs. And then the number of solutions that come with them. I mean, this is just all clearly going up. So this is going to be a big thing in 22H2 for sure, and also in the releases after that as well.
Are you also going to enable GPUs inside Azure services like AVD and AKS?
The answer to that one is easy, yes.
Great. Next question, you can read it.
What is your favorite restaurant ever? Did someone really ask this? Or is this just
No,
you?
I put it in there because I'm trying to get a little bit of a personal touch in it. So I was just curious, like when we are in Seattle region or I don't know where, what's your favorite restaurant ever where we need to go?
I will tell you what my favorite restaurant ever is. There's a part of me that's tempted to just answer with like a very corporate answer about Azure strategy, but I'm not going to do that. My favorite restaurant is called Colonnade Pizza, and it is in Ottawa, Canada, which is where I was born. It's where I grew up. And there's a location that's a couple of blocks from the Parliament complex, so like where all of the parliamentarians who run the government of Canada work, and that was where my parents worked. And a couple of blocks from there, there's this pizza place called Colonnade Pizza, which we had pretty often when I was a kid. And I am planning to go there in a couple of weeks when I go back to Canada for Christmas. And that'll be my first time back in Canada in 2 years, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Wow. And does NetPile approve those pizzas?
What was that, sorry?
Does NetPile approve those pizzas?
He is at least aware that I have pineapple on them. I don't know that I would describe him as approving, but I think he might be accepting. I think he might accept it.
Right. Okay, next question. Actually, it's just a topic because some people got a lot of questions about it. So SPLA, licenses, and multi-tenancy hosting capabilities. So we just touched Azure Stack Hub with multi-tenancy, of course. Anything to add that you already have something new on?
So I do just want to like send a winky face to whoever asked this question. I was waiting to hear about SPLA. So for those who don't know, SPLA is the service provider license agreement. It's a licensing model that you could use to get a couple of products, including historically Windows Server and also System Center. So let me say our direction long term, I think is pretty clear. There are multiple different fees involved in an Azure Stack HCI deployment, or at least there can be. At a minimum, there's the Azure Stack HCI service fee, which is the most people know it as probably $10 per core per month for the base product, right? There's also, however, an option that we just introduced. We announced it at Ignite a few weeks ago to license the Windows Server guest VMs on top through your Azure subscription. There's the Azure Kubernetes service, which has a fee that goes through your Azure subscription. And then there are going to be more and more add-on services over time that have fees. The structure for all of that is that it gets billed through your Azure subscription. The billing is automatic, so there's no need to true up or go purchase a license or manage a key or anything. It's the sort of cloud-like experience where it figures out how much you used and charges you for it. And all of that flows through Azure. Our approach for enabling someone to resell Azure services is the CSP program, right? The Cloud Solution Provider program. That is true of services in Azure, and it's also true of everything I just described on Azure Stack HCI. So you can, as a CSP, resell an Azure Stack HCI cluster to a customer of yours. And you can also resell each of the add-on meters on top, like, for example, AKS through CSP to your customers. So that's our direction for this kind of thing. I don't think there's any chance really that suddenly you'll be able to sell like Azure services through SPLA. And so I don't expect that there will be any world in which you can sell like AKS or Azure Stack HCI or both like through SPLA as well. I think, you know, the future direction here is definitely an Azure aligned billing model. And the resale option there is the CSP program.
All right. And what about, I got a question, licensing VMs to Azure. So right now you need a license to host those VMs. Is it going to be a per VM basis?
Yeah, so great question. We have a long list of requests that we've gotten for how we can make billing and activation and licensing easier, right? We are sort of taking small steps with each release. And like I said, we have frequent releases, which is what's encouraging about this, to make this easier and more flexible for folks. So one of the things we introduced middle of this year is the ability to bring your own existing license key for Windows Server VMs if you have one, right? So if you have a like data center key already, you can bring that, enter that into the Azure Stack HCI host, and we built a whole bunch of new infrastructure and new PowerShell commands and actually a whole new experience in Admin Center just for that scenario, where you bring your key, you put it in, you turn on automatic VM activation, and it works just like it would on a Windows Server host, right? What we've introduced more recently then is basically a variation on that, because the feedback we heard was large customers already have Windows Server licenses, small customers often don't, and new customers who are coming from a different infrastructure sometimes don't as well. And so we got a lot of feedback where folks were saying, okay, if I have a license, it's great, I can bring it, that's very convenient. If I don't, I would prefer not to have to go out and buy one because it's a different transaction model, right? Like now you have an Azure subscription for the host and you have a key that you had to go out and buy as an outright upfront purchase for the guests, and it's kind of clunky. And so what we've done is introduced, and this was announced at Ignite and it'll be coming in the December cumulative update. We've introduced this additional option, which you'll see in PowerShell and in WAC and in all the same places, where you can either enter a key that you already have, or you can just like purchase a license through Azure if that's more convenient for you. And that will be on, we've tried to make it basically as similar as possible to what would happen if you brought your own key. So it turns on AVMA on the host. It's all or nothing, so it turns it on for unlimited VMs, and it's based on physical cores. So if you bring a data center license, it's based on cores, it turns it on for the whole cluster and you get AVMA. The subscription option works the same way. It's just if you don't already have a key, now you don't need to go figure out how to get one. You can just click a button and it'll turn it on. Our intent is to sort of change as little as possible about how that worked and just provide a more convenient purchasing option, frankly. Now we are also starting to get feedback for per VM Windows guest licensing, right? And that would basically be the equivalent probably model and pricing as in Azure, right? So it's in Azure, it's per vCPU per hour, and there's a certain price. I don't know it off the top of my head. We have an ear to the ground on like the feedback around that, because that's something we could build as well, right? If there's enough desire for that, very, very open to the idea, but it's not what we're introducing in 21H2. In 21H2, it's very, very similar to bringing your own data center key, except you don't actually need to have a key. You can just click a button instead.
Interesting. So the Azure Stack Hub is already doing the per VM basis, right?
Yep. So Azure Stack Hub, yeah, they have the same per vCPU per hour, and whatever the price is, I think is the same in Azure as well. So if there's interest, and I mean that very sincerely, like please tell me if there is. Our team would be super willing to sort of look at bringing a model like that to Azure Stack HCI as well.
I think it will help hosters as well, right? So they can sell their VM license to their CSP, so they get a discount also get a fraction of percent of that profit?
So there's that argument, which is a really good one, right? Which is like if you have per VM billing, then you can do more around kind of dividing up how you do chargeback. The other argument that at least we're sort of staring at and saying like, oh man, we may have to do this, is as we launch more and more workloads, right? Like if you go back to when we launched Azure Stack HCI initially in December 2020, it was just like run VMs, right? And a couple months later, it was like, oh, now you can run AKS. And then a couple months after that, it was like, oh, now you can run AVD, right? As customers mix and match those, you have some desktops, some Kubernetes, some Windows Server, all running on the same cluster, which you can absolutely do, right? Like there's nothing about them that impose exclusivity or anything, so you can absolutely mix and match. I wouldn't be surprised if the feedback starts to be, well, we'd like to, be able to pay just for the Windows Server VMs we have, not for licensing the whole cluster for Windows Server. So again, we have our ear to the ground. Let us know that feedback if that feedback is there. We have a whole team who are just trying to make the sort of purchasing experience easier. And every couple months we launch something that makes it easier. We're already working on something that we'll launch in the spring of next year. And yeah, give us the feedback.
Is there a user voice that we can visit?
So there is. And you can also, I think pretty much everyone here knows how to reach either me on Twitter or you can reach out if you're part of our early adopter program. That's a really good channel for feedback as well. There's a number of different ways you can get involved.
Okay. Next question. Vendors recently allowed core limiter functions. So it's talking about scaling down the CPU cores in the BIOS. And if you then can pay less license fees to Microsoft, actually.
There's a lot of licensing questions. This is kind of fun. This is like third or fourth question in a row that's basically billing. I will say at some point you guys are going to get to a depth where I don't know the answers, but luckily I do know the answer to this one. So the short answer is that the Azure Stack HCI OS has a built-in service which is sort of constantly in communication with the Azure cloud. It obtains licenses for you, and the whole point is that you don't have to figure out how to properly license it. It tells Azure how many cores you have. Azure sends a license for that number, and it all just happens transparent to you. Everything, all of the, like one of our big goals from a design perspective was all of that infrastructure is also completely, like you don't have to worry about it. So all the certificates auto rotate and everything that's required to make that happen is sort of transparent. As part of that, like I mentioned, the OS detects how many cores it sees. That is based on how many cores are presented to the OS. And so if you're able to go into a layer below and turn some cores off, and then like, you equivalent of opening Task Manager or something, and they're gone now from the OS's perspective, then they won't get reported to Azure. So I think the short answer is yes. If you were able to go into the hardware and disable half of your cores, obviously you'd be getting half of the performance, and Azure would see half as many cores and charge you for half as many cores.
Okay, clear answer. This is a long one.
I'm going to read it. Would it be possible for bundle pricing in the future? For example, a cluster purely focused for PaaS services with SQL managed instance and Arc data services. Can the billing and pricing be made simple with a single bundle cost that covers all the underlying licenses? Let's say a customer only wants SQL managed instance on their cluster. Can we pay some price, 50 to 100 USD per core for a bundle license that covers the PaaS and the AKS and the underlying Azure Stack HCI service fee?
Interesting.
It is interesting. And I think that's 5 questions in a row now that are licensing related. So like I said, we have a team here whose goal is to make it as easy to make the purchasing experience as easy as possible. This is great feedback. We don't have there's no immediate plan where I can tell you, oh, that's coming in January. It's not, but this kind of thing is completely reasonable, and we do this sometimes actually elsewhere in Azure. So we would have to figure out a few different parts. We'd have to figure out the technical implementation. We'd also have to figure out whether there's enough of a customer segment here that this makes sense for, and then how to price it. But these are the kinds of things that are completely reasonable to suggest. So keep the feedback coming, and we have a team that's really interested in this exact feedback. So thank you for this question.
Nice. We got 4 questions left, and we got 0 minutes left. What do you want to do? Do you have like 4 minutes?
Yeah, we can do a lightning round maybe for the last 4.
Okay. This is about the preview and free version.
Let me read it here. Lab setup for long-term showcase. Can we run preview build forever?
So as I understand it now, if you're in a preview channel, it's free forever.
Correct.
If you're in production, you have to pay after 60 days, and otherwise you have to reinstall it.
Correct. Yeah. So I could give a long answer here, but since we're doing lightning round, there's 3 questions on here. The first one is, if I join the preview channel, is that free indefinitely? The answer is yes. So when you're in the preview channel, you are not eligible for production support. You are on essentially an unsupported build from a production perspective. And as a result, we don't charge you as if you're a production deployment. So there is no, the meters actually flow. If you go to the portal, you can see them, but they're all priced at 0 and it says Azure Stack HCI preview. So, and that's a permanent thing. That's like true after 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, 20 months. It's still just emitting the preview meter as long as you stay in the preview channel. The second question in there was the trial. So there is a built-in automatic trial period. You don't have to do anything to set it up. It's just like the first 60 days after you register a production cluster that's not in preview channel. We also zero out the billing, right? And that applies automatically for the first, it's actually 60 days, it's not 30. So we changed that recently. We changed that in summer. We doubled the length of it, 60 days now. Yeah, so let us know if that is not sufficient for your evaluation needs. The third question on there was actually a third one, Daryl, is, can you go back?
Is there any discount? Yeah.
Will there be any pricing discounts? So that's interesting. Because Azure Stack HCI and AKS are purchased as Azure services through your Azure subscription, any negotiating that you do at a subscription or a tenant level for Azure will also cascade down onto these things. So if you have, for example, a large Microsoft Azure consumption commitment, that can be used to purchase HCI and AKS. Likewise, if you have a discount of some kind at sort of the all-up level with Azure, it will apply to our services as well. There are some things that you can't do yet with our services. A good example of that would be like term pricing or reservation-based pricing, right? In Azure, you can like reserve a VM for a year and it actually makes the price a bit lower. That's like not a thing we offer yet. Open to feedback about whether that would be interesting, but yeah, generally these are Azure services that are subject to all of the same options and discounts and or lack thereof as other Azure services. Please provide ballpark insight into AVD for, wow, this is 7 consecutive slides of licensing questions. You guys must think that I am like the foremost expert on this at Microsoft. I assure you that that is not the case.
Seems to be the case.
Well, I think where I may hit my limit is actually on the second one on this slide. Well, okay, so for AVD on Azure Stack HCI, let me describe briefly what we've done there. So if you've used the AVD preview so far on Azure Stack HCI, and I know a number of folks have, it actually, some parts of it work surprisingly well, and then there are other pieces that are just completely missing. So like the Azure portal integration is not something that's present today in the current preview. We made the decision to ship the preview early so that we could get feedback from you and actually have enough time to like react to the feedback and incorporate it and make all of the changes that you tell us about prior to reaching GA. This is slightly different from what we could have done, which is like sit on it for longer and then basically announce it when it's like much closer to being done. We didn't do that. We decided to go with a preview as soon as possible so that we could actually get like genuine feedback and have time to react to it. Because of that, it's pretty early for us, and we actually don't have the pricing and business model finalized for how AVD will work on Azure Stack HCI. There will be a fee. I think that's a safe bet. Given the similarity with AKS, you could also imagine it's probably going to be on a per vCPU basis since AKS was per vCPU. But things like pricing, I mean, we just genuinely don't know. So it's an early preview. We put it out sooner than we would normally. And as a result, there's a few things we don't know, and this is one of them. So, okay, Yeah, I was right. You're starting to hit up against the limit here. How the overlap between an E3 and server licenses and AVD works, there's a chance that I will not get this right, so I'm not going to try to answer this. I'm sure we'll publish a licensing guide when we actually know the pricing for AVD. But yeah, you guys are hitting the limit here. Come on, I don't actually know the answer to this.
All right, last question for you.
What is your #1 future travel destination? As in that I most want to visit, or that I am visiting next?
Most want to visit.
Well, so the place that I most want to visit, and actually I've already booked this, and the news headlines in recent days have not been great, so I may have to revisit those plans, but is Botswana in Africa, in Southern Africa. So Botswana, if folks are not aware, in the southern tip of Africa, there's the country of South Africa, and then there's Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe across the sort of next row up. Botswana is in the middle. Really safe, really wonderful country, really charming people, really incredible wildlife. It's like the world's national park. So anyway, have wanted to go there for a long time. Currently have plans to go there, and fingers crossed that these variants and these travel bans sort of aren't as bad as they seem right now, because otherwise I may have to revisit that.
So you want to go there because of the wildlife? Is that what I'm getting?
Both, actually. I think it's so primarily, yes. Like, I think anyone who tells you otherwise is probably being a bit disingenuous. I want to go there because of the Okavango Delta and the Chobe National Park and those kinds of things. But I think it's also a pretty interesting country. It's a very small country in terms of population. There's about 2 million people. They have a remarkably successful history of stable government over the last 60 or so years. They've had like uninterrupted about a dozen 5-year elections running really smoothly. The economy is growing really, really fast. There's a lot of similarities you could draw between like Botswana as a success story within Africa and like South Korea as an economic success story. So it's also a pretty interesting country for non-nature reasons. And I'm like, I want to visit for those reasons as well. But certainly the nature is like second to none.
Wow, cool. And you know the funny part? Not one attendee in this live session has dropped because of this question, so they all want to know it.
Well, if anyone wants to go to Africa, I mean, yeah, let's go to Botswana.
All right, our last announcement. So the 14th of December, we're doing with a bunch of MVPs, we're doing Ask Me Anything like this. You can just shoot in questions. We try to answer them just like today. So please visit the tiny URL. I'm trying to post that in the announcements chat thingy, so you can click it. So please join us then. And for now, Cosmos, thank you very much for joining and answering all those questions. We went through them all, so that is great. And hopefully we do it somewhere early next year again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you everybody for submitting the questions too. A lot of those, I mean, kind of a lot of licensing ones in the second half, but a lot of them were really good and really interesting questions. And some of them are pretty nuanced. Like again, that one around the relationship between Azure Arc and the Azure Stack family. Happy to talk about those kinds of things. So thank you for the questions. Thank you for having me. Thank you for tuning in. It looks like we've had an incredible attendance. And yeah, I'm always happy to do this kind of thing. We'll have more news sort of constantly with Azure Stack HCI. That's kind of the whole point, right? It's a subscription. There's going to be new things all the time. Happy to do this again.
You may wave it off. Wave. Good. Thank you. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.